delivered the giant crate to the
Yes.
studio.
Yep.
He's strong.
That's the first time. Yeah. Doug and I went down there.
We had to rent a special truck to take that crate down.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to be covering math and Alice. I hope you all brought your number 2 pencils and ready for the quiz at the end. My wife is guarding the door, so no one can leave. So yeah, my name is Bob Bandy. My wife Amy is in the back, and we moved to Wayne a little over a year ago. I work for IBM. I have a computer science degree and a math ed degree, and I love studying the development of math over time. So this is kind of like exciting for me. If any of you fall asleep, I might poke you, and if I bore you to death, I hope you forgive me. If you remember when the apostles came to Jesus and they said, "How many times do we have to forgive people?" And Jesus said, "Well, you got to forgive them 7 times 70." One of the apostles said, "Oh no, I got to do math." So anyway, I wanted to ask, are there any mathematicians in the audience right now? So I can lie to you the whole time and you won't know, right? How many knew there was a connection between math and Alice in Wonderland? No. It's not apparent. It really isn't. And in fact, a lot of things I'm going to share with you are somewhat speculative. But what I will say, there's a connection, because what was Lewis Carroll's real name?
Charles Ludwig.
Charles Ludwig Dodson. And what was his profession? He was a professor of mathematics, geometry, algebra, and logic. Which, how much logic is there in Alice? Not a lot. And it turns out Lewis Carroll, when was Alice written? About 1865, right?
62.
62. Thank you. She'll keep me honest. Anyway, at that time, during the 19th century, there was some tremendous upheavals in mathematics. You might think of mathematics as kind of, who's going to debate in mathematics? 2 plus 2 is 4, right? Actually, in the development of mathematics, there was many times that there were a lot of controversy. And the 19th century saw a lot. And the first one was in geometry. I need to give you some background on that first. We use the word assumptions, and assumptions are generally a bad thing, right? But I will say that assumptions are something we have to make every day. You're driving down the highway and you assume that the person coming towards you at 60 miles an hour isn't going to veer in your lane, otherwise you'd be driving in the ditch. When you're up at 60 miles an hour, you assume those brakes are going to work. We have to live with assumptions every day. But when you're dealing with math, assumptions are poison. Assumptions destroy mathematics. So mathematicians try and keep away from assumptions. The only time that they allow assumptions are in these things called propositions. And propositions are really assumptions that we're going to assume true. Now, since assumptions are not liked by mathematicians, they're going to try and keep them as few in number and as simple as possible so people can agree with them. And it so happens that geometry, the field of geometry, was started by a man named Euclid. Euclid lived about 200 BC, quite a while ago, and he developed geometry based on 5 postulates. He wrote a book called Euclid's Elements, and this Euclid Elements was used as a textbook for geometry for up to the time of Einstein. So this was a very, very well-written book on geometry, built on 5 postulates, which we're just going to call assumptions. Number 1, a straight line segment can be drawn between any 2 points. I know there's a dot here, and she lives next to another dot, and we could connect the dots. So I was telling this to my wife, Amy, and rehearsing this, and I can draw a straight line. She said, well, what if there's a lake in between there? I don't know. I guess you'd have to get a boat. But I can draw, the first postulate is I can draw a line between any 2 points. Number 2 is any straight segment can be extended indefinitely. So if I have a segment like this, all this postulate says is I can keep extending it. Very simple, right? Very intuitive. The third one is, given any straight segment, I can make a circle from that segment. So if I have a segment like this, I can hold on to one side of that segment and I can turn that thing around and make a circle. That's what that postulate says. Very easy to agree with. You don't even have to be a mathematician to see, yeah, that makes sense. Number 4 is really easy. What that says is all right angles, all 90-degree angles are equal. How could they not be? That's a postulate, but that's something that we assume is true. All 4 of these are very easy to understand and very, even for non-math people. I'm going to read the 5th one to you. If 2 lines are drawn which intersect a third line in such a way that the sum of the interior lines on this one side is less than the 2 right angles, then the 2 lines invariably must intersect each other. That's not so easy. And this was something that Euclid struggled with. He didn't want this as a postulate. What this basically says is parallel lines don't intersect. If I have 2 lines and they're parallel, they won't meet each other. And it seems intuitively right? But mathematicians didn't like that. And for 2,000 years they tried to prove this. Nobody could. Then about 1820, 3 brilliant mathematicians, one of them, his name was Gauss, and you probably heard, some of you might have heard the name of Gauss, discovered you can't prove this. And in fact, if you assume that parallel lines might intersect each other, you get a different type of geometry, a non-Euclidean geometry, because this is Euclid's geometry. Now Dodson, Lewis Carroll, was a Euclidean geometer. And about 40 years earlier, one of the best mathematicians that ever existed discovered this non-Euclidean geometry. It had weird properties. Some of the properties were that you could grow triangles disproportional. You could have a triangle and one side could grow faster than the other side, and it's still equal. It's kind of like if I took a mushroom and I swallowed it, my neck would grow. It's kind of like arbitrarily growing and shrinking without any logic. And Dodson struggled with this non-Euclidean geometry. He didn't like it. The other, I just want to make sure I cover everything. One of these non-Euclidean geometries actually was used by Einstein in his general theory of relativity. So Dodson was kind of on the wrong side. He didn't, but understandably so. We had built this geometry for 2,000 years, and we created so many elegant proofs. And it was a beautiful geometry that this was the subject matter he taught, and now that's being threatened. But we found uses for that non-Euclidean geometry. The other struggle that we had that Lewis Carroll had was in the field of algebra. Algebra deals with multiplication, division, subtraction, and what are we adding and subtracting but numbers? Well, there was an abstraction that took place at this time that rather than adding or subtracting or dividing or multiplying numbers, we did it to objects. And these objects were made of 2 numbers. You'd have 2 numbers that would make this object, and you made a consistent algebra out of that. Then they took 3 objects, and you got this really weird thing. You could do this thing called rotating in mathematics, but it didn't obey the law of community. And there's a story in Alice where Alice comes into this room and she sees the Mad Hatter and the March Hare and the Dormouse. 3 people. And what's unique about this is all they do is rotate around that table. and they're not making any sense because they couldn't make sense of this algebra at that time. And it took until they added time to this strange algebra that they were able to make it coherent. And what was missing at that table? When March Hare opened his watch, the watch really didn't work. Time had left them. And so Lewis Carroll is showing that this algebra just wasn't working. And at the end, Alice walks out, and as she's walking out, they're seeing the dormouse getting stuffed in the jar, cookie jar or something.
The fire. It was a fire pot, wasn't it?
A fire pot. Yeah, I read it recently, but I don't remember. They're trying to. What he's saying is this 3 object number isn't working, and they're going to try and now stuff one of the objects out of here to make it make sense. So, to be fair, Lewis Carroll was he was a good mathematician, but he struggled with some things that were coming out in that day, and I like the idea that here's this man that struggled with some things that he was encountered with, and from that struggle, he put that into a creative process, and that creative process became a brilliant book. And that brilliant book has been around. I understand is quoted only second to the Bible and Shakespeare. So it's really been an amazing book for 150 years. That's all I have.
Thank you, Bud.
Yeah.